Mr. Kelly.
Well, good evening. The first thing I want to say is I want to thank all the local people for being so kind and welcoming us so much to their countries over here. I think they've done a fantastic job. They represent their people well, and I can't get over the everlasting welcome that we've had every place we've gone. And I want to thank them and thank them from the bottom of my heart. I also want to thank them for the memorials they've done for those who have gone and we don't have with us anymore. We should never forget those people, because if they hadn't done what they had done, neither one of us would probably be here today. So I want to say thank you to all those who have been in the service, lost their lives in the service. I think we owe them a lot, and I wish we'd all pray for them periodically. I don't have much more to say this evening, except that I'm extremely happy to be here. I've enjoyed myself immensely, and I hope the local people have also. Thank you very, very much. They told me to tell you I was in the Air Force. I'm a retired Lieutenant Colonel.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to be here. My name is Carl Matthews. I live 18 miles southwest of downtown Dallas, Texas. And this is my fourth trip to Saipan. I was here in 1944. And we had a great fireworks display, all in my honor. No, the next time I came back was 2004 for the 60th anniversary. I came to stay 10 days, I stayed a month. And I came to love you people. I came back the next year to participate in a Japanese documentary and to speak, by the way, for the opening of this building. And now you've got to put up with me again. I landed about 300 yards south of the sugar dock about 8:30 in the morning on the 15th of July, 15th of June. I was a member of G Company of the 23rd Regiment of the 4th Marine Division. We had come off of LSTs early that morning and into the water and rendezvoused, and then there was a huge string of LSTs, or amphibious tractors, all lined up, and all at one time we made for the beach. 8,000 Marines were landed on that beach in 20 minutes. And we had 24 days of hell that followed. While we were on the beach, he couldn't have been there over 90 seconds. And John Winnigan's brother was shot by a sniper. A little Morel boy from New York didn't move quick enough when an amphibious tractor came. It hit him, knocked him down, and ran over his legs. And the lieutenant was yelling and screaming, said, "Boys, let's get off the beach," because the shells were coming to the right and to the left and into the water and wherever we were going. But we got off of that beach, and we didn't go but about 300 yards that whole day. The next day we moved up into the hills, over one hill, up to the next hill, and we dug in for the night. And I remember we could hear the Japanese coming, but we couldn't see them. And suddenly a flare was shot by one of the ships or something, and it turned to daylight out there. And here were all these Japanese, and our company was at the ready, and we began to shoot. And some of them fled, some of them were dead. And I remember there was one man that moaned and groaned, and we couldn't see him. But about 4 o'clock in the morning, he stopped. Our original objective was to take Eslido Airport, which is where your airport is today. But intelligence had determined that most of the Japanese who had been in that area had gone north. And they changed our command, and the Army was to come in and take the airport, and we would form a line across the island and begin to head north. The first firefight we really had was about 2 miles east of here, across Suzuki Swamp. There was a coconut grove, and we had been on Garlow Bay area over there, and we were forced to march because they didn't have enough strength to penetrate this area around the coconut grove. So we got over there about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we took our places in a ravine, and we were out of the field of fire. When everybody was in line, they said, "Okay, boys, let's get out of here and go attack this thing." And we started across the open field. Not a shot was fired. But when we got about 3/4 of the way, all hell broke loose. I think every rifle, every machine gun, every mortar that they had in that area began to fire at us, and men began to die right and left. One of the most pathetic things, my tent mate was Wendell Nightingale from Scallion, Maine. He was hit. And we had run back to the ravine, but we didn't realize he was wounded. But when we got there, we could see him. And my friend, Richard Freeby from Corner, Texas, threw his rifle down, ran back out in the midst of all of this fire, and picked up Nightingale and started back with him. And Nightingale was killed. Shot again. Freeby dropped Nightingale, raced back to the ravine. His pack was riddled, but he was not wounded. And then he began to cry. A few days later, how much time to have?
All you need.
Keep going.
Into the mic.
Speak at the mic.
I don't want to take up too much time. But anyway, the next event really hurt. We had 280 men in our company when we hit the beach. At the end of the 24th day, 40 men were dead. I have no idea how many men were wounded. Some were wounded twice. But one thing that hurt, one of the boys' name was Howard. He was from New York State. 19 years old, good-looking young man, personable, and he got hit in the gut. And the lieutenant and I was the lieutenant's runner, so I had to stay with him all the time. And so they called us, and we ran over to where Howard was on the ground in front of the small house, farmhouse. And he was conscious. And he said, "Mr. Leary, I'm going to die." Mr. Leary said, "No, Howard, hang on, hang on. You're going to be okay. Hang on." But Howard didn't hang on. The corpsman came and pronounced him dead. And Mr. Leary went around behind the house. And when he came back around, I was crying too. We made our way up the Devil's Backbone, all the way from the little hills here, just east of Charnoa. And for the next 3 weeks, we fought our way up those mountains. We were always in the middle. Some days we went sometimes we went several days without seeing the ocean. We were down inside the mountains, digging out Japanese in the caves that were all over the place. We finally came to an area that was east of San Roque. And that's the way you pronounce it? San Roque. San Roque, thank you. And if any of you are familiar, east of San Roque there's a high cliff. And there are hundreds of caves in there. We were on the night of July the 7th on this ridge. And the Japanese had been firing at us, and we couldn't stick our heads over without drawing fire. So we sat there for the night. And then we began to hear what sounded like the Japanese having a party on the other side of the ridge. They were yelling and screaming, and we could hear motors running. And then early the next morning, they were gone. We didn't know what had happened. But General Saito had committed suicide in a cave just in that area. And before he died, he gave an order to all the Japanese who could fight to come together, and they had 4 or 5 of these parties. The next morning, about 4 o'clock, they assembled outside the cave where Saito had died. And then they began to make their way on the western beach down toward Tinian. There were 5,000 Japanese. Some of them had nothing except a sharp stick. When they went back to that area, our command took us out of the mountains and took us to above the cliff. And we lined up, and they said, okay, now go down to this cliff and take all those stragglers out. And when we were given a command, we responded. The lieutenant and I were with our second platoon. We went down about 25 feet, and we got ahead of everybody else, and they said, stop till everybody else catches up with you. So we sat on a rock ledge for a minute, and we talked about the fact that the Japanese, we were unaware that they had the bonsai. And we sat there and commented about the fact that it appeared the battle was almost over. And I could see Tinian on my left. And then over on the right, there about 1,000 yards, I was looking through my binoculars, and I saw 6 or 7 Japanese officers come out of the woods and out into the opening. And they were pointing to the south. And I pointed out to my lieutenant, I said, look, there are these officers standing out there. They were too far for small arms fire, and we were getting ready to call for artillery when they told us to jump up and go. And my lieutenant stood, and I was standing almost at the same time. And shots began to ring out. And he was hit twice, and he was dead when we hit the ground. The war was over as far as I was concerned. And I was evacuated and went to the hospital ship and down to New Caledonia and then back to the States and eventually given a medical discharge. I read a book that's coming out. By the way, I want all of you to buy it. Is that all right? It's called The Feather Merchant, and it's coming out in September. But somebody asked me about my service, and I said, well, I went overseas twice in the Pacific War. I went over first in January of 1942, came back from Samoa, and they fattened me up and put me in the 4th, and I came back over. We took the Marshalls, and then went to Hawaii, where our LSTs blew up, and then we came to Saipan. And I tell them, I went overseas twice. I was in 2 invasions. I got a Purple Heart. They sent me home and then gave me a medical discharge. And when I got back to Hubbard, Texas, I was still too young to buy a beer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carl. Now, I have a very, very special guest with us. He just walked in. I would like to introduce Mr. Okazaki. He is one of the World War II veterans from Japan. Please. So he just flew in from Japan.
そうですか。はい。
I can put
So
my arm.
how about a round of applause for our veterans? Now when you're done taking photos and stuff, like I said earlier, we have refreshments out here. Please, I think we are done with our vets. Very good, thank you, sirs. We can go out and do our refreshments. Thank you.
You were here when I was here.
This plaque was done in 1944. There are 5% Japanese American plane and 95% Japanese planes melted together, and it is a wonderful to see that now Japanese and the Americans are friends, and this is one of the symbols of this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Okuri, Dr. is going to have an opportunity to speak, and we have a translator.
Who speaks Japanese?
So you could talk for us.
ちょっとだけ言いま
What
す
do。you want?
He's going to speak.
通訳誰かしてくれる？私はサイパンの戦争で戦友がほとんど亡くなったんですが、アメリカの海兵隊に救われて、ハワイに送られて元気になりまして大変お世話になったんです。それで自分たちの戦友もほとんどが戦死してしまって、今では私一人が私の部隊では生きてます。そんなわけでね、今日はチャランカの水際で元のアメリカの兵隊と握手をしようと思って来たんです。はい。大変今日は嬉しい。はい。
Okay, I have to ask him to make it a little bit shorter so I can translate. He's very happy to be here, and he came to see the American veterans to shake hands, especially Chanan Canola. That's the place that you guys must be met 70 years ago. And he is the only one survivor, and he's still alive at the moment, and from his regiment, and he's very happy to be here.
How old is he?
93歳。
He's 93 years old. You can do Q&A.
Cute questions.
Sing a duet.
Oh, do that?
ああ、まだありましょうね。
Let's face the crowd here. Come on.
ありがとう。それでは皆さんありがとうございました。
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I heard this story this morning at Cagman High School, and Mr. Matthews here spoke to 40 of our students at Cagman High School, and 40 16, 17-year-old kids on a Friday before the weekend, before the summer. You could have heard a pin drop, and it was such a powerful story. I didn't want to let him get away without telling it to you.
Thanks. Now for that, I'll just tell you two stories. There were two incidents that involved Chamorros.
Talk into the microphone.
There were two stories that involved Chamorros. The first was one day when we were probably about halfway up in the mountains. We came to a place that was ringed around on three sides by mountains, I guess. And we had stopped at the entrance to this thing. But everything was very quiet. But for some reason, the lieutenant sent me across the field, which was maybe 200 yards, to a little house that was there. And they had gardens, and so I got over there, and the two other Marines had gone with me, and we heard some moaning inside. And we were kind of frightened at first. I was always frightened. And we went inside, and here was this lady, a tiny little Chamorro lady, and she had been wounded by a shrapnel and cut in I don't know how many different places, and she was moaning. So I got some old clothes and things and put under her head and gave her some water, and she smiled. And like, I think, was, I didn't know how to speak whatever she spoke, and she didn't know how I spoke. But anyway, I told those two Marines, I said, you stay here with her, and I would go back to the platoon lieutenant and tell him to send some corpsmen over here, which he did. But on the way back, I was alone, and I had to walk this 200 yards across the field, and there was a little brook, and it had a culvert. And we were always on the alert to see make sure everything was okay. And when I started across that little brook, I looked down and there was a foot sticking out of the brush. And I said, oh my gosh, there's somebody down there. So they had given us little cards that had phrases in English that's supposed to be in Japanese. I don't know what this means. O-I-E-D-T, whatever that is. And I shouted that out to him 2 or 3 times, and he didn't move. And I shot 2 or 3 times right close to him, and he still didn't move. So I found a rock about the size of a coconut, and I just kind of pitched it over at him and hit him in the tummy. That got his attention. I mean, he came out bowing and hands up, and so I took him up and turned him over. They sent the Chamorros back to an area that they had for them, I think in Charrington. The other time was, about 2 days later, we were up on this high point, and we encountered this Chamorro man. And he said, there's some people down here in a cave, but I can't get them out. So the lieutenant had us to go down this steep slope to where the cave was, and we surrounded that. And he went down to men and began to talk to these people. And finally they came out. There must have been about 12. But there was one lady that had 2 children, one under each arm. And the only way to get out of there was to go back up this steep slope, and there was no way that she could climb with a baby in each arm. And so finally I said, let me have the baby. And she finally said, okay. So we clawed our way back up. And I think that was one of my proudest moments when I gave that baby back. The Chamorro people were so grateful for what we were doing. In 2004, when I was here, I was so impressed. People that I didn't know would come up and say, you saved my grandfather, you saved my grandmother, and give me a hug. And now I'm back again. Thank you, and God bless you.